Looks like we are live now. We went live just as Damon looked away. That's how we do it around here. We like to invite you in, act like things are going great, and then just wham, just throw a bait and switch on you.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. The show is called Marketing is Bullshit. And my guest today is Damon Burton. If you don't know Damon, that wouldn't necessarily be that surprising because Damon is not, you are not really kind of like looking for the spotlight in this space, you know?
Yeah.
One of the things that I really watched about you over the time that we've known each other and I very much like about you is how low key you are. Another thing that I find really interesting, and I'm going to find a way to work this in today, is like you genuinely seem to lead with kindness, and that's something that is very popular to sort of position yourself as doing in this whole internet space, right? And so the internet space, in my mind, is coaching, marketing, like masterminds and public speaking and all that, and the way they all kind of converge on social media.
Yeah.
And they can wind up feeling very similar, can't they? Just in the people that are attracted to them and the way that people sort of operate.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that come to mind on that topic. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I try to find this balance for myself of there's a value in being a forward-facing person and being a public entity. So not just for like attracting leads, but for credibility and things like that. But there's also a lot of value for me on the other side of like privacy. And so, you know, I try to find the balance of, I like talking about my wife and kids, but I'll never disclose my kids' names, you know, and I share pictures of them all the time. But until I make this next comment, a lot of people don't realize that they're never identifiable pictures. Right. And so for me, it's like this balance of all the things you mentioned is this balance where it's like, there's a value in, like you and I met through this, right? And that's what's attractive to me is establishing relationships. But then as you share, then you also attract leads. And maybe to the last point of, you know, low key and, you know, an interesting observation I've had. So for those that, the 30-second dating background on me, for those that aren't familiar with me. So I ran an SEO agency for 17 years, built it up. We do a couple million a year, and I don't spend any money on ads. I don't have any lead gen. I don't have an email. I don't run a funnel. And so it's like, it's built off credibility and reputation. And what I've noticed, which is even new to me, maybe in the last year or two, is I've just done it that way because I don't like being the barfy sales guy. And so it's not like people can exponentially get to where I've got faster. But is it either at what expense, or is it sustainable? And so I've never wanted to grow at the expense of my sanity. And the part that's new for me in the last year or two is I've realized, you know, you kind of briefly touched on this, is there's a value to being low key and not hypey. And
for sure. Yeah. I think that opens up the thing I'd like to really talk about with you. We can talk about SEO and that stuff, but to me, that's like, of course you'd talk to the SEO national guy about SEO, you know, duh, right? But the thing that really intrigued me about what you just said is that you have strategy behind how you show up. And I think that, and I've been saying this for a while, but now it seems like it's like, okay, it's coming. Oh shit, it's here. The era of the personal brand. I think it's here. And I actually think that one can somewhat kind of chart the prehistory of this kind of moment. And here's how I see it, right? So 5 years ago, for what it's worth, and I know this might sound like a Johnny come lately thing, I was teaching people to do short form content. But I was teaching it in a different strategy that I learned from a guy named Dennis Yu. You may know Dennis.
Me and Dennis. Yeah, we met a few times.
And then it was never clear what their relationship was, but I think this other guy was like his protege, a guy named Mark Lack.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark was the one who directly taught me about this, what he called the $1 a day video strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And just for those of you guys who don't know, or who might want a takeaway from this, it's really that you create short videos and you boost them for $1 a day. And I was intrigued by this. And so I went all in with it. And I noticed in the year that I really leaned into it, a huge spike in sales. And so to me, that's like, how do you build a personal brand on social media? Well, it's got to be through content, right? That's the only way it can be. So what is content? Well, content is how you show up. And I think that then Alex Hormozy came along and just took the whole $1 a day video strategy and said, what happens if we do $10,000 a day, Yeah. And now the whole world knows the guy. But that was kind of predictable. It's like, yeah, of course. And it goes back to what I talk about a lot, and what I'm really interested in, which is what are the principles that underlie all marketing ideas? Rather than the tactics, what are the principles? And one of the principles is what's the word for it? Basically, it's just awareness, right? If you keep seeing somebody over and over again, you're going to start drawing conclusions about them. And if you keep seeing them over and over again in a certain context, the conclusions will probably fit into that context.
Yeah.
So I think you do a great job of that, man. I think you do a great job of that. And you're not spending $10,000 a day on short form video content, right? You've got this sort of Damon version of that idea, but it's like smaller, and it seems to be like totally catered to your personality.
Yeah. So I can walk you through how that came to be in my evolution of being strategic about it, because when it started, it was, let's go back about 3-4 years. And so I've had the agency for a long time, but what we're talking about, I've only been doing for a couple of years. And where it started was, I used to be only on Facebook. And then, like, have you had are you familiar with LinkedIn long enough that it used to just be like a resume platform?
Oh yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So I had this old dusty LinkedIn profile. And so what had happened was, I was really good about filtering my wall on Facebook. So it wasn't like a thing of anything dramatic. One day I just realized it was unproductive. And so then I went to delete it. But like most of us know that when you delete Facebook, you don't really delete it. You can just go back on the next day and turn it back on. And that really bothered me. And so I'm like, if I'm going to delete this, I'm going to wipe it out. And so I started deleting every post I had made and unfriending people. And then I quickly saw how much time this was going to take.
Yeah.
And so then my wife was kind enough to help out. And so I said, I just want to delete everything. So I logged in on her computer. She deleted every post I had ever made, deleted every comment I had made on anybody else's wall.
Oh, wow.
Unfriended everybody. And then, like, I joke, I say, like, if you want to really test your relationship, give your wife access to your private messages. And so then, like, she went through and just deleted all my private messages. And then I hit delete. Now, what had happened after that was, prior to that moment, I only used Facebook for personal engagement. So if I had anybody ask me an SEO question or a client add me, I would just ignore it. And so then I realized I had like this one person that got through that filter that I would talk to, and now I couldn't talk to him. So then I was thinking, well, I don't want to turn this all back on just for one person. So how do I be intentional about this?
Yeah.
And that's when I said, okay, well, let's use this for, social engagement, but then also let's use it for a business tool. And so then I said, well, why don't I also turn on LinkedIn, because that's where my audience is. And so we'll just do those two platforms. What had happened after that is I went through this, and I think a lot of people go through this struggle. They just don't acknowledge it. But then I was like, well, historically, I've only talked about personal stuff, my wife and my kids. How do I now entertain a business audience without boring them about my wife and kids? And how do I continue to cater to my friends and family without boring them about business? And I finally said, I don't care. Those are things that I want to talk about. So I started talking about them, and a lot of times people go, well, how long did it take until this started to work? Here's how long it took for me. It took about 3 months before I started to get past that imposter syndrome of what the hell do I talk about? And I would give myself the grace to type something up and go, that's stupid, and then delete it. That seems fake. And so about 3 months until I felt comfortable. And then it was about 6 months where I said, I think this is working and I'm starting to get leads. And then at
Yeah.
9 months, I said, let's add this up. And at
Mhm.
9 months, it had added $150,000 in reoccurring annual contracts.
Yeah.
So since then, it's gone on exponentially. But the key to your point is like, I just kind of gave myself the freedom to not follow the paths of like
Yeah.
not be hypey.
Yeah.
And the last point is like I see this in social media and in real life. There's a lot of people that are hypey online that get way more visibility than I do, but I
Mhm.
don't think they're converting. It's just like an entertainment value.
Yeah.
And I see this in real life. I'll go to conventions and marketing events, and I see all these people engaging with tons of people. And I used to feel a little bit insecure, like, oh, those people are going to dinner with a bunch of people.
Right.
And, and
Yeah.
they'd go to this like 20-person deep dinner, and then all of a sudden I'd get invited to this. What happened where my mindset shifted is then I got invited to this 5-person deep dinner. And I got to go to the 20-person dinner after the 5-person dinner. And the 5-person dinner was all ballers.
Yeah.
All of them were
Right.
chill. All of them were humble. One dude exited for over $100 million, the kindest people in the world. And then I go to the hypey dinner. Everyone was nice, but totally different league.
Yeah. Yeah. I've it's so funny you bring that up, the dinner at the event. Yeah, because it's totally a thing, man. It's totally a thing. And it's like it's easy to really get into your head when you see, because what'll happen typically, you'll go and everybody will meet before the thing and socialize. You'll go to your seats, you'll learn all the stuff and see all the speakers. Everybody gets hungry, and then you go off to dinner together. My first few events, I remember distinctly kind of like scanning the room, like who should I try to be, going out to the dinner with.
Yeah.
In my own journey, whatever that is, I had to go through a sort of a period too of figuring out like, how do I want to show up? Right. And it matters. It matters because like, I like to tell people, and I like to think of social media as like, the old leaded glass from like 100 years ago, and it was not perfect and it was not smooth and it would warp what you saw looking through it, make everything kind of like wonky. That's kind of like, to me, what especially Facebook, but I would imagine all social media is. It's like you're looking at reality, but it's a warped distortion of it. And kind of realizing that what I wound up doing was saying, okay, I'm just going to, other than the business stuff and the professional stuff, I'm just going to pick a couple of things that I'm really interested in to talk about. And I go down the path that you've gone down, except I don't even really talk about my family. But the idea was that it was a conscious choice. It's not like one thing is better than the other at all. What it turns out, the impact of narrowing the things that you share is that it's easier for people to kind of formulate an idea of who Damon is or an idea of who Manny is, versus if you're I would say the worst offenders in trying to have a strategy for personal brands are people who constantly share the vulnerable, soft white underbelly stuff, to the point where to the point where every time you see them, you go, oh God, man, I wonder what happened to so-and-so this time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, shit, that's too bad. Rooting for you. But yeah, so the headline, I guess, is that we are in the era of personal brand. I firmly believe that. And I have been saying that for a long time. And so then the question for people is like, well, how do I even start doing that? Right? Do I need a YouTube channel? Do I need a podcast? Do I need this and that? And the answer, I think, is it could be yes or no to any one of those sort of delivery mechanisms. But it's more so like, how do you show up, not where?
Yeah, I mean, I'll get on the note of the channels. I think the majority of us are familiar with like the concept of dialing in one before you go to others. You don't want to dilute yourself.
Yeah.
But and so I did that. I did just Facebook and LinkedIn for a long time, and then about 2 years ago, I invested a ton of money in hiring an internal team to go, okay, take this recording with Manny and chop it up and then go push it into little reels on Instagram and push it on TikTok. And I'm like, I'm not going to be there, but you can make me omnipresent there. And we got way more engagement and views and $0.
Right. Yeah.
So like it was not even in the same ballpark. We'd get, Instagram and TikTok. TikTok took a while to get any views at all. But then it got into the thousands per clip. Instagram was a little bit faster, but it was still slow. And then eventually we got to where we were doing like 3,000 to 5,000 views per clip. And then here we are on Facebook, and I'd get like 3 comments and like 20 likes and a $10,000 deal.
Yeah, exactly.
And so like the point, like I wasn't surprised by that. I told my team, like, look, we need to not pay attention to vanity metrics and see that this actually drives a return. But I think it's important for other people, like newer entrepreneurs, to hear, because a lot of times, especially like the TikTok angle, because they think this new thing's hot, right?
Yeah.
And it may work for you, but it's okay if it doesn't.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I'm surprised, because the impression that I was under was as soon as you sign up to TikTok, they just give you 1 million views.
Yeah.
based on what everybody says about it, right?
You know what? I'll tell you an interesting story, because you mentioned Dennis Yu and my experience with TikTok. So I think the reason why mine never really took off is when I combine it with Dennis' story and other people's comments. Like, from what other people have said, is like TikTok wants to like scan your environment and associate it with other things and other content creators. And so the example of Dennis was, I think it was, I might be wrong. I want to say it was Logan Paul or Jake Paul's house, some big influencer.
Yeah.
And they were doing these video clips. And as Dennis was there, he was like, hey, we're doing these things. And he would do some lives. Well, he never mentioned the influencer, but from Dennis's comments, TikTok was able to identify the environment and recognize it from other of Jake Paul's clips or whoever's clips it was, and then serve it to his audience. And then all of a sudden he got a bunch of engagement from that audience, even though he never tailored it to that audience or mentioned that audience.
Interesting. Wow.
Now, with that and other similar stories I've heard, like I always do my clips just right here. Like what you're seeing right now is 95% of them are just in my office.
Yeah.
So there's nothing for TikTok to see. Right? So I don't know if that was part of it or not.
I suppose when you think of it that way, my background is just weird geometric. It's just a bunch of white and gray lines.
Yeah.
One fancy green one. It's really interesting that TikTok does that. How do you feel about a platform? I would call that invasive almost, right? There's a certain way that level of sort of like, I don't even know what to call it, like of the social media platform itself, analyzing what you're doing and where you are and all that stuff. It's on the one hand, I think it's absolutely where we're going, and the train has already left the station, with the advances in technology, especially as it applies to social media. But how do you feel about that? Like, is there an ethical or moral kind of dimension to that level of let's call it platform scrutiny, for lack of a better word?
Well, I think you framed it perfectly. It's here, it's gonna continue, but I also hate it,
Yeah.
I briefly touched on earlier. In one context, I'm super private, and I try to teach that to my kids too. When they're like, "Dad, can I set up this one thing or whatever?" And the phrase that I use that isn't my phrase, but it's a phrase I use commonly is the internet is forever. And so like once you put anything on there, I don't care how scrubbed you think that becomes after you delete it. It's not, like, on any platform in any capacity. There's some way somewhere that still exists.
Well, I just got a software update from Apple that's supposed to fix a bug in the last software where and this is how they put it, in rare cases,
We'll acknowledge it.
Yeah, but listen to this though. Photos that you deleted and threw in the trash can resurface. Literally last night, I'm like, yeah, I'll take that software update. What the hell is that all about? Like, isn't the trash the trash? Well, yes and no, right? Yeah. Because as you say, it's like it's forever. It's forever. And so, not so much for you, but you want to think about that, right? So if we're in the era of the personal brand, which I firmly believe we are, and so for you guys listening, personal brand, the outcome of a personal brand is to influence in a way that benefits you what people say, think, and feel about you behind your back. That's really all it is. When you're not in the room, how do people talk about you? Do they talk about you? If so, what do they say? That kind of thing. And so if we're in the era of the personal brand, and now it's time for, long form copy to be, and long form content to be sort of like included in people's strategies for growth. And we also know that the internet is forever and nothing goes away. I feel like those things together really triangulate that it's important to have at least the beginnings of a strategy of how you show up.
Well, I mean, it's also, in general, it's probably beneficial for just about everybody in every industry, but it's more beneficial for certain people in certain industries.
Yeah.
And the privacy thing is interesting because even though there's a value to being vulnerable and to, I would say, being realistic, right? Not just the constant highlight reel. Right. But even for, I don't know how you feel, but even for me, knowing the value of it, I'm probably more conservative on the privacy side than a lot of other people. And even though I know the value, when I still push out content or share a picture, even if it's just me, I cringe sometimes, not because I care, not because of the picture, but because I'm like, shit, here's another thing of me that's now out there forever.
Right. Yeah. It's the whole cost to participate, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the sense of it's really a weird thing for me, social media, because like for so many of us, it opened up tremendous opportunity for me. Sometimes I'll have kind of a hard day doing this work, and all I have to do is remember that I left construction to do this. And, you know what I mean? And I spent 20 years painting houses and like 14 of those years as a contractor running my own business. And there's no such thing as a comparison between this hard and that hard.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. You know what I mean?
Well, I in the types of hard, yes. I think this opens up a whole other conversation though, because like I think about people in my family that are historically laborers, and to your point, like I've never experienced a super deep labor intensive job.
Yeah.
But when I see it from my family side, I see the physical exhaustion.
Yeah.
And I can't relate to that.
Right.
But I guarantee that they can't relate to my mental exhaustion.
That's true too. Yeah. Hang on one second. What's up?
I just wanted to come in and ask, because you just moved in.
Yeah.
And I haven't had a chance to introduce myself. What do you do?
So I'm on an interview right now, man.
Talking to Damon Burton.
I'm talking to Damon Burton right now. Let's circle back around and I'll fill you in.
He's gonna see now what's gonna happen is he's gonna go Google who the hell's Damon Burton.
Right? That's right. And that guy has a real estate office right next door. So you probably just got
a lead, dude.
Probably got a new guy.
This is actually a relevant topic. So the other day I bought a purchase online, and then the guy messages me and he goes, "Oh, our warehouse is in the same city." And so like their website says they're in a whole other state, but where they really run it is just apparently down the street. And he's like, "We just finished a website and we need SEO. You want to meet up?" And because there was some part in the background where we went and he looked my name up, right?
Yeah.
And so that's happened a surprising amount of times where, and this is great for the marketers, is like, you don't need a personal brand benefits to drive sales, but even if it doesn't drive the initial lead, it could convert them because they go look you up.
Yeah. Right. That does open up a whole other, maybe possibly even more relevant to the title of this show.
Damon Burton SEO National, Damon Burton SEO National, Damon Burton SEO National show.
It's time for the change, isn't it? There we go. Okay, that's better. So one of the things that I talked about a lot when I was teaching the $1 a day video strategy, which again, I learned from other people. So I want the public to understand that it's not something I take credit for, but it's something that worked tremendously. And I don't remember if it was Dennis who told me or Mark, probably Mark, because I was working more closely with him. But he said, you have to make a shift from needing short-term, direct, measurable ROI from every dollar you spend.
Yeah.
And this is something that I have then gone on to teach a lot of other people and have a lot of conversations about. And that's kind of like, if we had to, so personal brand seems to be the sort of general theme of this conversation, although we didn't plan it that way. So if you're going to think in terms of your personal brand, then you probably already know who Alex Hormozi is, because he's the guy who just took it to the nth degree. And he didn't have like a short-term measurable ROI objective for just cranking up the short form video content and putting all that money behind it.
He actually did.
Did he?
And the reason why I know is because I'm in Russell Brunson's inner circle, and that's where Alex Hormozi learned how to do what he does. And
okay.
He came in, and his goal was $20,000 a month. I'm dead serious.
Wow, that's crazy.
Now he's gunning for $1 billion.
Yeah. Now, did you ever get any insight into how he measures the ROI of it?
No, he went out a year or two before I came in. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Man, should we talk about the now really controversial?
No.
Yeah. I wondered about that. About that getting ready for this conversation.
We can, well, we don't need to talk about that particular conversation, but we can talk about that topic. And because I think there's too many marketers that get involved in other people's business and they use it as a soapbox, whether their opinion is correct or not. Yeah. I think it's out of selfish intent. Right. And so like, there's all these people that they do it for the vanity metrics that we're talking about. And it's not to say that I agree or disagree with a lot of the controversial things that people chime in on about, but it's like, does it really do you any good? Yeah. Like that's why I don't care to talk about it. Not because I don't have an opinion. Right. It does neither of us any good. And I think so many other people who just get caught up and they're like, oh, here's a bandwagon that I can get some attention on because other marketers are jumping on that bandwagon too. Yeah. Believe it or not, and if you only see my public facing stuff, this may surprise you. But so the reason why I am so vocal about that stuff, and by that stuff, I'm talking about marketers who are found out for being, dishonest or whatever. Primarily that's what I feel I need to call out. But part of it, and this is funny because when I try to share this, it just goes right over or under people. Part of it is because I'm still pissed that I fell for all that shit when I first came into the space. No, seriously. But then it also kind of goes back to deeper stuff. In my own life, I have this weird distinction that I was born in a cult, a literal actual cult. And so one of the things that has just sort of is part of who I am, and I think it's because of that experience. I don't think it was like sort of, inherent characteristic of me. One of the things is that I'm very, very like cued into manipulation tactics. Yeah. Now here's the funny part. We can talk about that because I agree with that. Yeah. But the funny part is I've been attracted to sales and marketing since I was a kid, which is all about varying degrees of manipulation, right? And so at some point, I think of it like there's a continuum, a spectrum from Charles Manson and Jim Jones. Here's a story for you, Damon, that
for some reason haven't shared publicly yet. It's not that I'm afraid to, it's just, it hasn't gotten around to it. My dad was a member of the Guyana Temple, Jim Jones Temple, in the jungle.
Yeah.
My dad had this pattern of, which I may or may not demonstrate signs of the same thing, but he had this pattern of being attracted to charismatic leaders, coming into their orbit, and then starting to like dissect and criticize them.
Wait, so he did it. So he was drawn in because it was valuable to him, or because it was so attractive to criticize them? Like it was positive in the beginning?
It was never clear. But one thing I would say about my dad from the time I did get to know him and talk to him was he was passionate and sincere about the ideas that cult leaders use to sell people. Like there's a different way, it's a better way, it's a more utopian way, that kind of thing. He was 100% like a soldier for that idea. And so as far as I know, including the one that I was born into and Jim Jones, he was in like 4 or 5 different cults.
Have you watched the Netflix documentary on, it's not only on Jim Jones, they cover like a dozen cult leaders, and they cover it from the more or less the marketing angle, like how they recruited people. It's fascinating.
I want to watch that. And here's why, coming full circle, because like on the one hand, manipulate or influence taken to that degree is, I recoil from it. And yet my business is influence, and more than that, I had a colleague say to me once, we were just sort of riffing back and forth on marketing. And he said, here's the rub. Yes, marketing can really come across as skeevy and icky and gross, but people demand to be marketed to. And for me, that was just like, what do you think about that? I think you have thoughts there.
I have a strong opinion on it. Yeah. And I do agree there's a spectrum. And I do agree that there's a part where it's morally okay. Mm-hmm. But my line in the sand is way more conservative than others. And so there's a big difference between where I'm like, okay, other people can do that versus what I do. Right. And I'm almost entirely on the non-persuasive side. I feel completely gross at all. And like, I even go through these different, I've paid for various, trainings and one-on-ones over the years to have people look at my product and go, how do I bring it to maybe this market or that market? Because historically we've never done any ads or lead gen. And now I'm like, well, why don't we shoot for the moon? And so we're mapping out all the stuff to start doing sales in these different channels. Mm-hmm. And across all of them, the majority of things, there's nothing wrong with. I just don't like it. Yeah. And so they're like, well, do you ever try to just like, I'll give you a great example that is completely innocent in most contexts that I just don't care for. It's like, why don't you just close them on the phone right then and ask them for their card? I'm like, because if they don't want what I have to sell them right then, they're going to probably be a crappy client, and I don't want a crappy client. Right. So for me, there's like, there's strategic reasons why I don't want to chase every sell. But at the same time, in that moment, I'm like, I don't want to. It doesn't feel attractive to me. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm super on the conservative side of that.
I think when it comes to the persuasion and where it turns to manipulation and the things like I think that mentality of why don't you just ask them for their card on the phone right then is sort of born of the more hard side of the persuasion thing, right? It's more that's like, for instance, that's too intense for me too. It's not something I want to do either. And so as a result, I have to look at like, well, if my nurture and pipeline process typically takes this long, where other people might say or actually have one that's much shorter, but I don't have to feel like I'm, like checkmating people into saying yes, then I'm going to do mine. And so for me, the question is, how do I then turn up the top end lead flow so that my pipeline can feel natural to the people going through it? I've sort of coined trust and permission for my sales and enrollment process, which I I kind of like the way it flies in the face of everything that everybody teaches. But more important is like, I have to do that to feel good about the process.
Yeah.
I have to. I can't be what I call like the white shoe dorsal fin sales guy who's just moving through the water looking for meat.
Yeah.
And at the same time, though, the rub is I still love the feel of a successful sale and,
Sure.
all that stuff. So, and actually at a meta level, what we're sort of getting to here is that it's ambiguous, right? And there's a degree of comfort that's going to match each person.
For sure.
I think that that sort of I want to say ethical ambiguity. For lack of a better term, I'm going to call it ethical ambiguity. Is just infused in everything that is sort of taught and suggested and shouted out by the marketers and by the coaches and all that stuff in this space, which I think actually adds to not only the confusion for people about which way do I go, but I also think that it contributes to the low success rates we have in this industry.
Yeah, and not only low success rates on the front end, but retention on the back end.
Yeah.
Like I made a post the other day that said something along the lines of, gimmicks attract leads, but composure attracts business, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what it was is too many people are sacrificing long-term reputation for short-term sales.
Yeah.
And it's your point where you illustrated about like constant, your closing time, where yours is longer, theirs is shorter, but they're perpetually trying to refill it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm never chasing leads,
right?
And I'm never having to restart the marathon.
Yeah.
And there's other people that are in a comparable level of revenue that are just on a constant rat race of repackaging their product for whatever's trendy in the market right now. So they take their same thing and then now it's the AI version right now.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, I'm glad they're finding a way to stay, with forward momentum, but that sounds exhausting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the places that I think you and I differ, and it's a small place, would be I'm not glad they're finding a way forward and momentum. When it's transparent to me that all you did was slap AI on the top of whatever you're doing, or whatever the trend is, like I think about this stuff a lot, like maybe too much.
Yeah.
And I think at a meta level, the process is kind of like the most easy part of the market for quick kills is the new people coming in who are naive, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just going to negatively name drop here. Yeah, that's right. I'm going to do it. So Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi, man, and the Knowledge Broker Blueprint thing. Like I sat in on one of those webinars just to see what it was like. And it was Dean in particular. Dean, shame on you, man.
But is that a new version of their product? I'm not familiar with their product.
It's the thing they've partnered up on for like the last 3 years or 4 years. And it's basically just how to start your business as a coach, as an online service provider of some kind. But, it's got huge chargebacks. It's got terrible success numbers. And I think the reason for that is if you saw the webinar, if you saw the pitch, you'd go, oh yeah, that's all talking to newcomers. You know what I mean? It's like lofty promises of what could be and hero's journey stories about how I'm just a little guy from Florida and somehow I figured this out. And it's all that kind of stuff that is now by the initiated among us instantly recognized as what they call in the 12-step program, newcomer bullshit.
Dude, I had a wild experience before I started my agency. I worked for this entrepreneur who financially was super successful, but in every other capacity, I didn't envy whatsoever. And I ended up leaving ultimately because of the toxicity at his place. But I remember he would run these affiliate offers. And so he was the affiliate product owner. Mm-hmm. And then it was what's called a negative option. So it's like you sell a thing and unless the customer goes out of their way to later opt out, you automatically rebill. Uh-huh. And so he had high chargeback rates, high customer complaints. And I remember when he first found success, I would do his landing page designs. And so like I was his only full-time employee, had a part-time secretary. So there was like 2.5 of us, and this guy was doing like $1 million or 2 a month.
Yeah.
And I remember when his first product took off, coming in like an hour before him, and I get in my inbox and there's like 300 email complaints, like just from overnight. And he finally comes in and I'm like, what do I do with this?
Right.
Like just the logistics of answering all these, I don't have enough time.
Yeah.
And he walked up and held shift, clicked on the bottom, clicked on the top, and hit delete, and just walked away.
Wow.
And where this comes full circle is, I felt bad for the customers, and then it exposed me to a new perspective on how some people do business different.
Yeah.
And I thought at some point this will catch up. And then fast forward, and to your point, years later, I realized it almost never will catch up because there's always new blood.
There's always new people coming in. Yeah. It's, like copywriting is something that's very important to me, and it's something I pay a lot of attention to. And it's for the most part, all of the copy, and this is a generalization, I'll admit that, and there are exceptions for sure. For the most part, all of the copy and all of the messaging that gets the most dollars spent on ads, because the people are the biggest who are doing it, is all speaking directly to what I call the magical thinking. It's the person who hasn't had enough experiences yet to understand there's no such thing as a $3,000 program that just changes your life, sort of while you're passive about it. And they're getting better and better at couching that promise in innuendo and suggestion, but it's still there, right? It's still that fundamental, this is the easy button notion. And then for me, and for all the people I've worked with, like, I mean, one of the things that I am just saying more than anything else is there is no easy button. Mm-hmm. Not really. There's easier buttons, but there's not an easy button in the way that you might have felt it was promised to you. Or even a few years ago in the marketing, I remember my colleagues using easy button images on their ads.
Yeah, the Staples button.
Yeah, the Staples easy button. What do you think? How do you think this, other than the new people coming in all the time, how do you think this whole culture that we're in keeps sustaining itself? Do you think it's all just because new people keep coming in? Or what's your take on it? You've been around and you're in different rooms too with people who are behind the scenes of bigger operations.
It's I think this goes into the psychology of just people in general. Mm-hmm. Even outside of the marketing world, it's I guess if I had to like simplify it, I'd say critical thinking.
Yeah, right.
There's completely unrelated to business. There's every day there's somebody I see in public make a decision that makes me scratch my head.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I've struggled with personally, where it's like sometimes you feel bad, sometimes you feel like kind of the odd person out, where you're like, the older I get, the more I realize that like you think, like maybe the easiest way to illustrate it is like when you're a kid, you think adults have everything figured out.
Yeah.
And then you're an adult and you're like, I don't know a damn thing.
Anything figured out. Yeah.
but now you have the scope in which the world operates.
Right. Yeah.
And so now you feel more stressed out because as a kid, you don't know how things work, but you're naive. Yeah. As an adult, like how the world moves, and you still don't have it figured out.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's kind of like that. There's an element of where there's always going to be a way. Everybody always has a pain point. Everybody always has a need.
Right.
And there's always an opportunity to position yourself for good or bad. And I don't know that there's ever a way around it.
I don't either. I figure there's a percentage of the market that can make you into a complete financial success that will always be sort of green, sort of young, dumb, and whatever. And and I think that just looking at the marketing that comes across my social media feeds, it really seems like it's a reasonable conclusion. Let me take away the ranting voice and speak in reasonable terms. It's a reasonable conclusion that as long as there is that influx of new people, there will always be those who find a way to sort of promise them the moon,
Well, it's that, and there's always going to be a new medium, right?
And a new
So
medium too, yeah.
we catch up to liabilities, and compliance catches up to print mailers, and then there's the next thing, and then liabilities and compliance catches up to emails, more or less, and then now there's social media, and then there's going to be Meta or whatever, right? Like VR, and so there's always another medium, or there's a trailing time before
there's a lagging indicator.
There needs to be enough time with enough people with enough of a pain point for some action to be taken, and there's always, good or bad, marketers are always innovating or identifying those gaps in between.
I think it's good and bad, and I have to say that because I'm so fascinated by the work itself. It's just endlessly intriguing to me, the positioning and how changing a few words in your copy can have a dramatically different impact, and the
science of it.
The science of it. And I get excited if I have a new client that is not in the typical kind of offer or the typical space where I've got to really dream up how to position them. To me, that's really intriguing work. And it's far more satisfying to me than seeing a finished product of a painted house, right? Just as an example. So I don't know where I was going with that, but what I do want to ask you as we come to probably time here pretty soon, just what are your thoughts on the FTC? That whole rigmarole.
Well, this is interesting you've asked, because I've never been asked this, and I have lots of opinions. Because of that gentleman that I worked for, I've seen the good and the bad of the FTC. And so, the good is there, in theory, is an effort for consumer protection.
Right.
In reality, it's a business.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, I've seen people legitimately being pursued by the FTC. I would say I've probably seen more people illegitimately pursued or artificially inflated in the pursuits, like crazy stuff, or even before, when I was working with the guy before that was toxic, he probably he had a couple issues which were legitimate, but by proxy I knew other people that were in the space that were way more conservative and way more proactive with him, that got legal counsel and would go and make sure they were within the guidelines. And it doesn't matter how nice of a guy you are, if they just decide they don't care anymore, you're taking on the world. And I've seen that a lot, where marketers make a strong-willed effort to be persuasive, but within the guidelines, and just get crushed.
I think part of it is, and I would suspect that this is either by design or at least that they've realized it works in their favor. It's what's the word? It's apocryphal. The regulations and the requirements and the guidelines are unintelligible and non-understandable to even the brightest of the sort of people doing business. And I think that's part of it, right? Is you can't adhere to what you don't understand. And so in that sense, it's it gets really scary. But then I also realize, like we could correlate it to this fear that we all have of being tracked, right? By whether it's microchips or our phone or whatever. And the fear, of course, makes sense at a gut check level. But the reality is, like, for the last 40 years, your bank could turn off your bank account just like that. You know what I mean? And so all the stuff that with the tracking and privacy question, which is an important question, all of the stuff that everybody's afraid of is already there. It's not that it's coming, it's there. But the reality is that for most people, they don't really care that much about you. I'm reminded of Elon Musk on the Joe Rogan podcast where he's talking about privacy, and he goes, "Trust me, nobody cares what kind of porn you watch."
Yeah.
I just thought that was like, way to sum it up, man.
Yeah. But, I mean,
but yeah, go ahead.
The not the guy that I've mentioned, but the guy the second to last guy I worked with before starting. Well, the last guy I worked with before starting my agency, he ended up getting shut down because the ATF and the FTC and the local sheriffs raided the business. And so what had happened was he had a business before that one that had a civil suit, but never had a criminal suit. And then the criminal suit caught up. And so once they had a bone to pick, then they come after the new business. The other one had been shut down by then. But what was fascinating is the guy had, and I largely switched to that employer because he was way different than the other guy. Like, he married his high school sweetheart, loved his wife, loved his kids, tried to do things within compliance, treated his employees well. And this guy had, he had an attorney at I might say this wrong. He had an attorney at the federal level that tried to take him all the way to, I want to say, to like I don't know if it was the Supreme Court or what, because I just remember there was like only 6 instances of this court. And I imagine only the Supreme Court is like that limited in number of courts. And so this attorney took the guy to 5, he took the trial to court and it got thrown out. So then he took it to another jurisdiction 5 times.
Wow.
He would just had a bone to pick with this guy.
Yeah.
And it got thrown out. Last one, stuck.
Wow.
And the dude got decades in prison. And so, like, I mean, that's a good example of where it's like, once they decide that they don't like you, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. If that's the case, then it's like, ooh, man. But then again, so I don't know how common that is, but it's a reality that we all face. Like, I don't want to be sort of kitschy and heavy-handed here, but when I was younger, I was a thug, but I wasn't always getting in trouble. But the police always treated me like I was in trouble. You know what I mean? And the way they do it, by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but it's very much like the movies where the same police patrol the same areas. Mm-hmm. And so you get to know them, and it wasn't until I got to know the hard ass that patrolled my neighborhood that I finally kind of like could relax a little bit. Because the guy, I actually kind of made friends with him in a way, but he would regularly, after we made friends with him, me and my little clique, he would tell us about other people in the neighborhood that he was just fucking with, and now my neighborhood was full of people who is like, well, if you're not doing something wrong now, you're going to in the next day, or you did in the last 24 hours. But that was his mentality. And so I say all that to say that that's terrifying, but in reality, it's always a risk. Like, anyone in a position of power can kind of like just orient on you and then do that shit.
Yeah.
What do you worry about that stuff personally at all? Or are you just sort of,
well, I don't do any advertising, so
right. Yeah.
But one thing that has caught my interest lately is like, do you know Anik Singhal? And he's got a new book out called Don't Say That.
Yeah.
And I haven't bought it yet, but the concept of the book is fascinating to me. And so it's basically like all these things that through his own experience of getting sued by the FTC, like,
Right.
and hiring a compliance lawyer, that he should avoid saying. And one thing that stuck out to me is like your testimonials are out of compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know that from hearsay of other marketers, like you have to have an average representation of your testimonials. They can't all just be raving reviews.
Oh,
so
interesting.
You have to
Yeah.
throw in a bad one every once in a while.
Yeah.
I don't have any bad ones. And I've never had a chargeback in 17 years. Like I've never had a complaint.
Yeah.
Like, so in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I run these ads, I don't like, they are all 5 stars. Like, what do I do?
Right. How do I deal with that? That's fascinating, man. And by the way, let me just say here, as a guy who I have made my bones partly by calling out the bullshit and the people, right? So I just want to say here on the podcast, and for no compensation and for no real reason, that Onyx Singal, from what I can tell, seems like a stand-up guy. Seems like a legitimately, like, he's successful, but nothing I've ever seen of his felt douchey.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And I don't know him personally either. I just want to say that because I recognize that people do expect me to call out the BS or whatever. And so I think also when people seem to be doing a good job, that's worthy of calling out too.
Yeah.
I love watching how you do what you do, Damon. And this is the second time we've gotten to talk, and I'm grateful for it. I really appreciate that you're kind of a living example of how to be successful without it feeling douchey, especially, but every time I talk to you or I read your content, it feels like, for lack of a better word, like you found this path. It's created success for you while keeping very high integrity, and you genuinely seem happy.
Thank you.
So in a way, man, it's like you threw the ball at the 3 fake bottles at the fair, and you knocked them down, and you won the big stuffed animal.
I asked my kid the other day, there's a local amusement park, and we're walking through, and I asked him, and I go, "What's your favorite game here?" And he said that one. I'm like, really? The hardest, most like screwed up, manipulative game in this entire park is your favorite one?
Yeah. Well, that's a kid who's going to have the grit to get through struggles right there.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's good catching up, and I appreciate the opportunity to hang out and chat.
Likewise, man. If you need SEO, just think SEO National. Pretty easy to remember. If my experience is any indication, Damon is a very accessible guy who's happy to talk to you. So I appreciate your generosity and your coming on today, man.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Good catching up.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye, everybody.